Welcome to the Scotch and Rocks talk on mitigation tools. This is given normally just after the Be Avalanche Aware process chat that we give on our winter mountain leader training. But I've just split it up for ease here because the BAA chat can be quite long. So mitigation tools with our Be Avalanche Aware process, where the whole aim is that we make good decisions. It's a framework to try and, I suppose, put our thinking and our preparation and our planning in having a little bit more structure around that. But we're still going to have to make decisions out on the hill, dependent on what we see and how things are reacting. And these mitigation tools, I suppose, get around or help us get around. They certainly don't solve all the problems, but they help us get around, I suppose, that bottom second line there. That ultimately, we can often be lazy in our decision making. We can be seduced into poor decisions. When we're working as a mountain leader, we're always going to have pressures on us. We want to deliver, be it for our clients. We want to get out and have good quality mountain days if we're preparing for our winter ML. So there's a whole pile of pressures that go on that can make us or sort of guide us into making poor decisions. And these tools here are, I suppose, they're not specifically designed for the winter ML, but they're there to help us try to not make poor decisions. So we'll just run through them. The first one, the Ulysses contract. So from Greek mythology, I'm no expert in that area, but the whole idea here is that in the planning phase, or potentially in the journey phase, but more realistically in the planning phase of the BAA process, we're going to agree as a team, as a pair, whatever it is, or as a mountain leader. If you're leading a group, it might not be so much of an agreement, but you're clarifying it, you're telling people that there are certain areas or certain slopes or certain aspects or certain routes that you are not going to go onto. They're sort of out of bounds. And I'll often go as far as, on a laminated map, just hashing that area off so I can't get it go onto it. It's sort of a visual reminder. And it's really important to share that thinking as a group or with your team if you're the leader in making the decisions, because then they're part of the process. But also, should you be sort of seduced during the day, standing there looking, up at a slope, thinking that's an amazing line to get up onto the top of that Munro, and you're sort of starting to forget your Ulysses contract, if the group are aware of that as well, there's more chance of them, voicing up and saying, well, hang on a second, you sort of explained to us that this area was out of bounds and now you're thinking of going there. So it's just another way of sort of providing a check process. The individual veto, this can work. It can work with a winter mountain leader team, but you've got to be careful here. Basically the concept here is that anyone within the group, be that you're out for getting a QMD in your preparation phase, or you're out with a group working, anyone has the option within that group to sort of to say, no, I don't like this, I don't want to do that, and everyone else in the group listens. Now, as I say, working as a winter ML, that can be pretty challenging, because if people have maybe the dangers are more perceived than real for some people, they don't have a real understanding of what they're looking at, they can often have fear that isn't justified, as it were. And whilst it's good to listen to that person, because they may be seeing things that you aren't seeing, if they have the power of the individual veto, that could really scupper your plans. But it does work really well, I think, for out with peers. you know, be it climbing or walking in the preparation phase. I think it works nicely in that area. Devil's advocate. Again, if you're doing this with a group and a group of novices, it sometimes doesn't work very well, because the person who's given the role as devil's advocate within the group has to have some knowledge. They don't have to have an in-depth knowledge, but it has to be done sensibly. And the whole concept is that basically every time you make a decision, and you can put parameters around that decision, it could be just avalanche terrain, it could be just route choice, etc., etc. But every time you make a decision, that person's job is to challenge your thinking and to challenge your decision. Not with the idea of it being disruptive, but to sort of force you to think about it and justify why you're making those decisions. Again, it can work with groups, but it works really, really well, again, in that preparation phase. If you're out with someone, then, you know, they don't have to do it for the whole day. You can change during the day. One person can be devil's advocate for the first half, and then you can change around sort of halfway through the day. But you're going to have to justify your decisions and why you're doing something in a particular way, which is really useful on the preparation phase for any of the awards, but the Winter MLs, we're talking about avalanche terrain here, because you're going to have to do that to your assessor. The assessor wants to see your inside thinking, your thought process, and so they will ask questions that won't necessarily challenge you, but they will be there to for you to explain and justify your decision-making process. And then the secret ballot. So this is basically, as it says, it's a secret voting system. I use a really simple system when I use it. I use it summer and winter and all sorts. I just have two dry bags, and I have green cards and red cards. And green is yes, red is no, and everyone gets a green and red card, and they come up one at a time and pop the cards in the bag. And one is the voting bag, and one is the discarding sort of dry bag. And then we just count it up. You can have it almost like a secret individual veto, in that any red cards in the voting bag means that it's a no, or you set parameters around it. And this can be used, it can be used in avalanche terrain, obviously, and for decision making. Again, you got to be careful with a group, but I use it a lot just in simple sort of context of, do we want to do the next Munro? You know, do we want to go the long way around home? Do we want to go the challenging way? And again, you set parameters to make sure that people understand it, and it's important that everyone buys into the vote beforehand. And then the last one, the most sort of complex of decision-making sort of processes or mitigation tools, but probably the most useful, comes from Edward de Bono's thinking hats. Edward de Bono was sort of coined the phrase and developed the phrase of lateral thinking. And again, like all of these, it wasn't designed for avalanche terrain. It wasn't designed for mountaineers and mountaineering, but it works really nicely. And the concept here is that you have 6 cards, as you can see there, and then when the card's out, that's sort of the process. So for me, what I do is I put out the card and sort of show it around so everyone knows what the topic is, as it were. But then everyone has a chance to sort of voice their opinion. So it might be that you start with the information card, the white card. You know, that's just pure fact. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's 30-mile-an-hour winds. It's -5. It's snowing lightly, etc., etc. So it's just pure fact. And I then virtually always go on to the emotion, the gut. What's your gut feeling? What's your gut instinct? Because if you do any of the others before the red card, then it can affect that. So, then it doesn't really matter between sort of the black, the negatives, the yellow, the positives, and the creativity, the green. I'll virtually always go with the blue at the end, the overview, the sort of a review process. But we work through them one at a time. And the nice thing about these is that, if there's that pessimist within the group, but they know that they're a pessimist and they don't want to be seen to be the always the negative one, the nervous one, the one who, it's that group, it's that person who doesn't want to voice up, as it were. When that black card comes out, it's sort of carte blanche to be that negative person. So, it allows people to voice their opinions when the card comes out without feeling that they're being a particularly negative person or a particularly positive person, etc., etc. And the creativity cards allows people to come up with sort of wacky ideas, or just thinking completely laterally, like, well, we could always just go home, we could always just go to the cafe and eat cake, etc., etc. So they're a really nice little tool, and I just carry, the 6 cards, little laminated cards, in my rucksack, topped in the top pocket. And again, I use it. It's a really useful tool for a bit of group thinking, and I use it summer and winter. I use it for avalanche decision making, or maybe not decision making, but sharing information. But I use it for not just that. I use it for any decisions that can happen in the mountain. So there we go, a handful of decision-making tools. It's really important that you have a play with them. I've given you some of my views, certainly not exhaustive, and there'll be plenty of other really good information and ideas out there. But if you don't have a play with them, you're not going to work out what works for you, what works for your personality, your style, what works in certain types of situations, what works with certain client groups. So certainly, get out there and play with them, and see how it helps, that sort of information gathering and decision making in the mountains. Thanks very much.